Very well. Is there any pressing question that I cannot but answer? Okay. When it comes to that, I would like to make some additional reflections about living systems and their relations with their circumstance, which perhaps is appropriate to do now. In part through some conversation I had at lunchtime, and in part because I was going to do this anyhow, but I'm perhaps doing it now because it seems to be the moment. When I speak about a living system, I repeat it like this, and I'm here as an observer speaking about it. In fact, I should make myself as an observer, whoever is the observer, more complete. Talking about living system or a living system, to making a distinction. I make a distinction and say, look, an autopoietic system. Now, the distinction consists in separating something from an environment, from a medium, from a circumstance. And what you separate, according to me, better what you bring forth, is something that is specified by the operation of distinction that you perform. If you are aware of what you do, you will describe the operation of distinction in the terms that constitute the entity. In the case of a living system, I can say, look, there is a dog there, or there is a fly, or look, there is an amoeba, by looking through the microscope. And by making that distinction in terms of what I see, I imply in each case an identity, without specifying fully what makes it. If I say an amoeba, I'm referring to a general understanding in the community to which I belong or in which I'm speaking, so that presumably other people are going to understand what I say. Look, there is an amoeba. But I'm implying an organization. I'm not describing it, it is implied by my naming an amoeba. Our living system is implied by my naming living system. I'm implying an autopoietic entity. Now, this is what I do. I shall come later on to the question of reality again, but for the moment I'm speaking about what we do when we talk. In the understanding that if you ask me how is validated that what you are saying, I would say it is validated through certain operations of distinction that I perform. So I'm speaking in awareness of this analysis that I made this morning. But whenever you speak about something in any domain of reality, you speak as if it were there independent from you. It is constituted through the operation of distinction, but you speak as if it were there independent from you. So I say, that's a living system. Now the question that arose in some moment today at lunchtime was about the boundaries, the extension. Now there are systems whose boundaries you can specify in the domain in which you are making distinctions. But there are other systems whose boundaries you imply. You don't point to them, but are implied by the distinction that you make. For example, a club. You belong to a British tradition, so there must be clubs in Australia. Now, what is the extension of a club? What are the boundaries of it? Because people belong to a club. Who belongs to the club? The person that has satisfied the relations of belonging to the club. If you satisfy certain relations and you perform certain operations, some of which may have to do with paying certain dues or with behaving in a certain way, you are a member of the club. Which is the border of the club? It's an operational border. It's the border of membership. I can come into the building and yet not be a member of the club. I can even stay there for many hours and I'm not a member of the club. Yet if I begin to perform the behavior that constitutes membership, I become member of the club. I stop performing the behavior that constitutes membership, I stop being a member of the club. So the borders of the club are operational. If you look to the operations, it's very clear who belongs and who does not belong. How would you put the border, if you were to put a border around it? You will unite all the people that are members of a club in a drawing and you will say this is the extension. In summer the club is extended in such a way because people go in holidays. In winter it's extended this way because people come to the city. But the borders are operational. Now with the living system happens the same thing. The molecules that belong to the living system are those which participate in autopoiesis. Those which do not participate in autopoiesis are not components of it. What is the medium? Anything that does not belong to it, but which an observer can claim is in the circumstance in which this entity is realized. What is the medium of a club in Melbourne? The human community of Melbourne. Not all human beings that live in Melbourne are members of this particular club, yet the medium in which the club exists is the human community, where there are certain declarations that can be made or have been made so that this is recognized as such and such a club in that human community. Okay, whenever one makes a distinction, whenever one speaks about something, one is implying an entity which is defined as a totality in one of two ways. Either it's a simple entity, which is in itself a totality, and which is characterized in the distinction by certain features that we treat them as properties of it. And so we do not ask how do these characteristics arise. They appear in the distinction. They don't have to be explained. They are characteristics or properties of it. And whenever we do that, we speak about what I call a simple entity. simple entity or simple unity. If I accept my property, my characteristics, my abilities as an observer to be properties, I treat myself as a simple entity. A simple entity characterized by certain abilities, one of which is to observe. But we also make distinctions and say, haha, look, a living system, and we distinguish an entity which in the moment in which we distinguish as a totality, and then we treat it as composite. We treat it as if it had components, so that its totaliness were the result of its composition. Systems are such a thing. Composite entities in general. Living systems are composite entities. In what sense? That they are totalities which can be decomposed in components. An atom originally was conceived as a simple entity. The word atom means exactly that. The atomic particles of Democritus were simple entities. Afterwards, many years afterwards, at the beginning of this century, the end of last one, physicists began to think of atoms not anymore as simple entities, but as composite entities, because they could do certain things which separated components. So, we also distinguish composite entities. But while simple entities are characterized by properties, and we speak as if those characteristics were intrinsic to them, this is what the word property is connoting, composite entities entail two operations. Now, all what I'm saying, you know and you do. I'm just putting a special order in it so that it becomes relevant. Composite entities entail two operations. You distinguish an entity as a totality and then look at its components and separate parts in it, which, if put together in a particular manner, constitute that totality. So, this entails two operations. Entail simple entity and composition. A composite entity entails distinguishing of a totality and distinguishing a composition. Two operations. Now, the fact that there is these two operations makes the composition analysis or the decomposition an operation that is related to the totality. So not any fracturing is a decomposition of a particular composite entity. For example, you remember the Bible, this episode in which the wisdom of Solomon is being exhibited when two women come to Solomon because both women claim that a particular child is their son. So Solomon said, okay, if you both are right and each woman is indeed the mother of the child, So what we shall do is to decompose the child by cutting it through with a sword. So hang the child from one leg and bring the sword to cut it into, to decompose the child into. And one of the mothers says, no, 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 please, don't decompose the child. Why does she not want the child to be decomposed? Because it will not be decomposed, will be cut through and killed. So she prefers the child alive in the other woman's arms, but the child alive. So just cutting the child in two did not constitute a decomposition, because it did not separate elements that put together could reconstitute the totality. So the components of a composite entity are those elements which, if put together in a particular way, reconstitute the simple entity which was decomposed. Now, a simple entity as such is not decomposable. We are not concerned about decomposition. But when we speak about the composite entity, we distinguish a simple entity or a totality. Perhaps I should write here totality. Or whole and decomposed. So components are not in themselves. Components are components in relations of composition of a particular totality. If you go to a shop to buy a carburetor for your car, what you get is not a component. You get something that you call a carburetor, but it becomes a component in the moment in which it is put in the car. Outside the car is not a component of the car. It is an entity that, if connected in the proper manner with other elements, becomes a component of the car, yes. But it's not in itself a component. So there are no components of anything floating around in the world. Yet there are entities, molecules, which, if connected with other molecules or with other entities in a particular way, constitute a totality, then those are components of that totality that they constitute. Furthermore, we know also, and this is a feature of daily life that we acknowledge, that the manner of putting together in a composition of a particular composite entity is not just juxtaposition. That expression which says the whole is more than just the sum of its parts is recognizing exactly what I'm talking about. Is recognizing that components are components in relations of composition, and that the relations of composition are not just any relation, are a particular configuration of relations that indeed realize the totality. When I speak about organization, I refer to that particular configuration of relations in composition that realize the totality. So when I say the organization of a living system is autopoiesis, or the living system is defined as a system or constituted as a system in the autopoietic organization, I'm speaking about a particular configuration of composition that makes a particular kind of composite system that is a living system, or a cell. It's a particular disposition between the molecules that make them components of an entity which is a cell. It's a dynamic thing, yes. So organization, when I speak about organization, I refer to the relations between components that define the identity of a particular kind of system. So different systems are realized through different organizations. And whenever I speak about a particular kind of system, I am connoting a particular organization. So here, I would say that as soon as one speaks about a composite entity, one has organization and structure. Now these distinctions are very useful for doing many things. For understanding systems, for having clarity, conceptual clarity when one speaks about systems, for realizing what one is talking about when one talks about something. For example, for realizing that whenever you speak about an entity, either you speak about a simple one or a composite one. But whenever you speak about a composite entity, you imply an organization. You may not describe it, but you imply an organization. Because the organization is the relations between components that define the class identity of a particular system or of a particular composite entity. So whenever I speak about living systems, I imply a particular organization, which is the autopoietic organization. Whenever I speak about cars, I imply a particular organization, which is the car organization. Whenever I speak about trains, I imply a particular organization, which is the train organization. Whenever I speak about societies, I imply a particular organization, which is the organization that defines a particular collection of human beings as a society, or of living systems as a society. Now, structure I use the word structure to refer to the components and the relations between components that realize a particular entity as an entity of a particular kind. So whenever you speak about structure, you speak about the particularities of a particular entity. Oh, this dog, beautiful dog, this is my dog. It's called Lobo. Yeah. The particularities of this dog, which make this particular dog, are realized in its structure. The condition of being dog corresponds to its organization as a dog. But the organization dog is realized through a structure. Now, here comes something which is very interesting. The organization is necessarily an environment. Organizations remain invariant as long as the identity of the system is conserved, or better, the identity of a system is conserved as long as its organization remains invariant. In the moment in which the organization of the system changes, the identity of the system changes, becomes something else. If the organization of a living system changes, that means stops being autopoietic organization, you get something else, a corpse. Not a living system anymore, something else. A lump of molecules, a frozen cell, whatever it is, depending on how that happens. So organization is invariant. How long will Australia as a country be Australia? How long will exist Australia as a country? As long as the organization that defines this as this country is concerned. Suppose that you go abroad, you are 20 years abroad and come back home, and you say, my goodness, this is not my country anymore. What are you talking about? You are saying that that which defined Australia as your country is not anymore realized. Suppose that Australia is defined as a country by its constitution, which is a declaration of the kinds of relations that are legitimate to be held between the people that constitute this community that is called Australia as a country. And for some reason there is a constitutional reform and it's changed completely. Then you can say, it's a different country now. We should not continue calling it Australia. It's a different country. If you continue calling it Australia and you say this is still Australia, that means that what defines the country is the name, Australia, and the conservation of the name, and not the constitution. So, organization defines the class identity and is necessarily an invariant, because if it changes, the class identity of the entity that you are dealing with changes. The structure, however, can change. Now, this is we do in daily life, by the way. I am not claiming that this is something that we do not handle in daily life. I was living in this house 20 years ago, but now it's not, it's a different house now. You see, one says two things. One says, I have been living in this house, or I was living in this house 20 years ago, but it's not the same house anymore. We're saying the following things. A composite entity house has been conserved. Oh, I was living in this house 20 years ago. That means that that organization house has been conserved. But it's not the same house anymore. We're meaning that there are some features in the organization of the house that I consider definitory of the house in which I lived 20 years ago. And those are not anymore. So, it's not the same house. It's something different. Now, if I'm talking about house only, then what has changed is the structure. The organization house has been conserved, but the structure has changed. New rooms have appeared, some rooms have disappeared, new walls, new windows. But house has been conserved and the structure has changed. That means that when I say it's not the house and the same house anymore, I am identify something through the structure. Because I'm looking at the structure, but the entity I'm talking about is house.
If we talk about first order and second order change, would you say that first order change is a change in structure and second order change is a change in organisation?
One could do that, but then one must be very careful to realize that when you speak about second order change, because there will be a change in organization, this entails a loss of identity. So one could do that, having that very clear. Now, why this distinction is so significant? It's significant both conceptually and operationally. Conceptually, because it allows us to see what is conserved and what changes in any system. And operationally, because it allows us to see that any system, which is a dynamic system, will be the same in a whole dynamics of changes as long as those changes take place around the conservation of something which is the organization. My mother calls me with the same name that she gave me when I was a baby. She called me Chicho. So I come home and say, Chicho, how wonderful that you came to see me. But I don't come agoo, I don't come saying agoo. Agoo, no, I don't do that. I come walk my mother, I take care of her, kiss her, and so on and so forth. Huh?
Accepting workshops.
Accepting rituals?
In workshops.
Yes, exactly. But that means that something has been conserved in me in all these years, which is being connoted by giving me the same name. My identity as a particular human being. Yet my structure has changed. I have grown, the proportion between legs and arms and body and trunk and head have changed. The kinds of things that I can do have changed. All those have taken place as structural change. But when a mother says to a boy, for example, you should not do that, you are not a baby anymore. So the mother is saying, the organization baby has disappeared, you are now a child, you are a different entity, a new organization realizes your identity now. You are a boy, you are not a baby. So a boy and a baby are different kinds of entities in terms of the organization that defines them. And the transition from one identity to the other has taken place with structural changes in the process of growing and changing its structure and the dynamics of relations and so on and so forth. The organization baby disappeared and appeared a new one, which is that of a child, through the conservation of the organization human being. So at the same time, this means that in a given structure, different organizations might be realized. So a particular entity, composite entity, can be the place of intersection of different kinds of entities. different organizations. For example, we are human beings. At the same time, we are mammals. What the organization that defines us as mammals is different from the organization that defines us as human beings. But both intersect, both are realized in a structural intersection in our body. Once we went, my wife and I, with our children when they were small, in a trip to the south, and we had a jeep, and we traveled in the jeep and slept inside the jeep and so on and so forth. And so the children called the jeep the car house. So the car was a car and was a house. There we have the intersection of two different kinds of entities. There was a structural intersection of a car and a house, which was directly recognized by the children. So I'm not speaking about something mysterious, but I'm calling attention to what is entailed. There is a structural intersection through which different entities can be realized through the same structure or through elements of structure that pertain to the two or more entities. Now, how is this participation in the different kinds of entities? Through participation. A component is a component of this of the realization of this kind of entity if it participates in the realization of this organization. And that element could also be a component of this other, because it participates in the realization of this other organization. Because components are not components in themselves. Components are components in the participation of relations of composition. The same happens with the members of a club, for example. A person is a member of a club only as long as it satisfies the relations of membership of the club. You stop satisfying the relations of membership, you are not a member anymore. You begin to satisfy those relations again, you become a member again.
So could you talk, for instance, about a motor car as never being a polluter? Well, it's got the organisation motor car, but, well, it has the organisation that makes it, or the structure which allows it to be fixed.
Yes, if you speak, pollution, of course, is a relation between this particular entity and circumstance. But you can say a car intersects with a polluting entity, which is an entity that produces something that, from the perspective of the environment, are pollutants. Okay? And so when you produce or put certain things in the car such that the gases that it expels are not pollutant, then the polluting entity has disintegrated. It's not realized anymore. So things are not fixed. Systems are not fixed. Systems exist only to the extent that the organizations that define them are realized. Components are not fixed. Components are components only the satisfaction of relations of composition. Membership in a family takes place in the satisfaction of the relations of membership in the family. The children spend lots of time somewhere else, and when they come home, the mother says, "You are not a member of the family anymore, apparently." And the mother is making a complaint to the child that is not satisfying, according to her, the relations of composition of the family. It's not satisfying the relations of membership of the family. And the child can say, what do you mean, Mom? I come you, I kiss you, I love you. Yes, but you spend so much time away, you come so late. And maybe there is a conversation such that the child begins to come earlier, for example. The mother is happy. So the mother begins to accept that the child comes late. What is conserved is certain relations of membership in the family. But there was a complaint from one member of the family that some relations, according to her, were not being satisfied. Now, if these relations of membership are not satisfied, then it's not member. Precisely, it's not member anymore. So this is very interesting. Because in a way what I'm saying, things are not in themselves. Things are under the conditions of constitution that constitute them. And those conditions of constitution are not fixed. If they are, you have the entity. If they are realized, you have the entity. If they are not realized, you don't have it. Notice that in the explanatory path of objectivity without parenthesis, this is not easy to grasp. This is not easy to grasp because we are accustomed to think that things are in themselves. These things are in objectivity, in reality. A car is a car in itself. And sometimes we have difficulties because we have difficulties to find the boundaries of that which we want to distinguish in itself. Because we want it to be in itself and we do not realize that the entity we are talking about is not in itself. It's in the conditions of constitution. One could say, oh, the boundaries of the living system are very difficult to point out. Because one wants them to be there. But if one realizes that the boundaries are defined through the participation in the realization of the organization of autopoiesis, then there is no problem, even if you cannot point to them. Because they are operational. You know that if this molecule participates in this, then belongs to it. If it does not participate, the autopoiesis does not belong to it. But if we realize this, of course, there is a dimension of fluidity that becomes apparent. Fluidity in systems. There is a dimension of fluidity in personal, interpersonal relations that becomes apparent. Because if we think that things are in themselves, we think that human beings are in themselves too. That you have some identity. In Delphos, in Delphi, in the sanctuary of Delphi, where there was the oracle of Apollo, at the entrance, it's used to say, know thyself. Which is an invitation or a demand to know what you are in reality. My claim is that we are nothing in reality in these terms.
So when you talk about yourself, you're really only referring to how you are in the languaging in that moment when you refer to yourself as who you are.
In part in that, but you are also referring to the distinction that you make as you participate in a particular domain of relations in which this distinction is done.
Yes.
So I personally do not participate of the invitation, though know thyself. I do not want to know myself. And I do not want to know my friends, so that I may love them always. Yeah, because if you know yourself, you are always restricting yourself because, look, I mean, this is not as I am. Oh, my dear friend, what did you do with your hair? So you don't let your friend be, because it has to be according to how you know this person is. No, I do not know my friends, I do not want to know them. In this way I love them all the time. I accept them how they are. And I accept them how they are in being. Just a second.
Do you extend that also to a knowing of yourself in the Buddhist sense that you don't actually have an entity called self that you can permanently recognize?
Yes, you could do that. Certainly. In fact, many of these Oriental religions have their characteristics of certain reflections that are of a similar kind like this. Now there are differences from what I'm saying, but much of the insights are similar, because come from similar reflections, by the way. Although similar reflection, not the same reflection, similar reflection because they have different histories. But there are moments in which there is a coincidence in the distinctions.
That the distinctions you make are what you make for now and are not part of the reality of...
Not part of an independent reality.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you say this phrase, know yourself, could you not say know yourself as an organization, assuming that the structure may change, and therefore you never know yourself as part of an objective reality? But if you understand that as being part of the parenthesis objectivity, yourself then being an organization, the concept of yourself being an organization, not the structure.
Not certain kind. Yes, one could do that, but in our culture it's not that what is meant. So I agree, yes, for example, I am this kind of system, but this is not what is understood in our culture. What is understood is something in itself, which one distinguishes depending on many factors, the soul, the spirit, the transcendental identity.
So this one is constricting.
Yes, this is constricting. This puts a demand on identity under the assumption that identity is transcendental. Now, certainly an identity is conserved, if you are the same kind of entity, you are conserving an organization. And if you are the same person, you are conserving that which defines you as such a person that you are saying is the same. But at the same time, this understanding allows you to see or to realize that around certain fundamental organization you have a space of variability which is open to you, which previously was denied because of this demand for an invariant identity which was not of the kind but of the particularities, and which was restricted. And we are continuously doing that. We say to somebody else, you are lazy, you are intelligent. Now these two statements are terrible. Because they fix you. I mean, when they tell you are intelligent, this is the most horrible thing that they can tell to you. Because immediately there is a restriction to your behavior. You are not free to do nonsensical things. You must always, yeah, exactly. You must behave according to certain characteristics that are being implied or demanded from you by saying you're intelligent. If you are stupid, it's the same thing. That means you will never do anything intelligent. Now they have different consequences because they constitute different restrictions on you, but they can be both terribly damaging. If you tell to a boy or a girl, you are intelligent, you know how to do these things, not as a general comment of abilities, but as a demand of how to be, how do you do that? You're an intelligent person. This is as restrictive as you say, you're stupid, you never do things right. So what I'm saying, none of us is intelligent or stupid. Yet, we can have intelligent or stupid behavior. Which is a different thing. It's not a reference to identity, it's a reference to relation. Oh, my child, you should not do this. In our community, we don't do this. This is inadequate. You are making a reflection about the relation. Oh, you are stupid. How did you do that? You are not making a reflection about the relation, you are making a reflection about the identity. And the children live this in a very different manner.
I'm wondering about some of the temporal effects, where the boundaries are in time. There's a component that will be part of the entity necessarily at some time.
Excuse me, will be a part of what?
There's a component of an entity that will be a necessary part at some time. Always a part of the entity.
Sometimes it's the case, but not necessarily always the case. For example, you go to the school where you were when you were a child and you say, you see, this is my desk. I know this because here is my signature. I made this mark in it. And as long as you can see that there, you can claim this is my desk. So the presence of that is essential for the identity of that entity as that particular entity. If I claim that I am a man with certain principles, then of course the presence of those principles in my behavior must be always there. Because if those principles are not apparent, then I'm not the person I said or I used to be. So this may happen. But at the same time, we as living systems, in fact, are in continuous turnover. In a few years, all our atoms are different. All our molecules have been replaced by other molecules of the same kind, but different particular molecules. So in us, strictly speaking, nothing remains in terms of structure constant. But what remains invariant is the organization of autopoietic system of second order. But there are circumstances in which you want something, a component to remain invariant, and you say, this is my desk, for example. I am not making any recommendation with this. I'm just speaking about systems and some of the features of their dynamics. And some of the reflections about the dynamics have interesting consequences, particularly those which have to do with the conservation of organization. We shall see in a moment more about that.
I'm wondering, is it an oversimplification to look at the difference between objectivity and parenthesis
to say that without parenthesis, there's no distinction made between organisation and structure. It's as if when you look at objectivity without parenthesis, it's as if you're ascribing a certain structure to something.
And keeping fixed structure too.
Sorry?
And keeping fixed structure too in a way. Keeping fixed structure too in a way.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I suspect that you may be right in saying that one has less flexibility to make this reflection here. I suppose that one can do it anyhow, but one is less prone to do so because one is so much attending to the objectivity of things that one does not realize some features of the dynamic. For example, this is a curious thing. As far as I know, nobody has previously to me said organization as defining the identity of a system as an environment. Something that is so obvious.
We normally look the other way and say it's the structure that's...
Yes, but at the same time, the idea that the identity is defined by the relations that constitute the entity as a particular kind of entity is necessarily invariant, I have never heard. Now, of course, I'm ignorant in many dimensions. Some things I know, many things I do not know. So maybe my ignorance. But it's curious. I have never heard anyone to make a statement in which it is recognized that the identity of a system is defined by certain relations which remain invariant. And of course, this goes a little bit with your suggestion that here one does not make that observation because one is thinking in the identity in a transcendental way. Humberto Maturana, at the beginning of the century, developed these systemic notions in biological systems. And he spoke about the organismic view, the need to look at the organism as a totality. And there is much speaking about holistic approach. And yet you rarely find, and I would say that Humberto Maturana certainly did not, and I have never heard of the people that speak about holistic approach or the need for having a holistic view, I have never heard any of them saying what constitutes the whole. Humberto Maturana spoke about organismic view, but he did not have a way of speaking about what constituted that totality that he wanted to talk about. But here you have it. This is what defines the totality. The organization that defines the class identity of the system. So this distinction, curiously enough, is very new. But I think that you may be right then that some of the difficulties to see that have to do with this objectivity without parentheses, cultural manner of looking for identity. I made this distinction for the first time, publicly so to speak, in 1972 in a meeting in France of the Royaumont Society for Anthropology. I was invited to this meeting. It was going to last 5 days. I had just written for the first time about autopoietic system in a small book called Autopoietic Systems in English. And one of the persons invited to this meeting was Jacques Monod. Jacques Monod, French Nobel Prize winner person already in those days, he's dead now, who had written a book called Le Hasard et la Nécessité, Chance and Necessity, some of you may know. It's a beautiful book, it's a very interesting book. And I had eventually the misfortune, if you wish, of sitting the first night beside him at the dinner, at the opening dinner of this meeting, which was going to last 5 days. And I was a young man in those days, so I was also very blind in many respects. So I sat beside this great man and I said, "Oh, what a pleasure to meet you, and I have read your book, it's a very beautiful book. But," and that, of course, is terrible, because then, and at dinner time is worse. I mean, this is it's the worst thing that you can do. And I said, "I have written something," and I spoke a little bit about this notion about autopoietic systems and so on and so forth. And he said to me, "I thought about all that when I was writing my book and discarded it for useless." The next day I was ill in bed, and I was 5 days ill, with a cold, with a terrible high fever. I couldn't participate in anything. But the last day, at the last session, I was already a little bit better, so imagine 5 days in bed, friends would come to tell you how wonderful the meeting was, how interesting, and you were floating somewhere else. And I sat there, nothing. I did not exist, of course, because I had not participated. And somebody asked the question, what is the difference between organization and structure? First, silence. There were several Nobel Prize winners and very, very distinguished scientists. And Foster was there, Monod, Jacob, Lurie, I mean, very distinguished people. Nobel Prize winners, all of them. Not Heinz Foster, but the others. First, some silence, and then people go on talking about whatever other thing. So I said, so nobody has an answer to this question. This is my chance. Either I say something now or never. So I propose this distinction. And the person that had asked the question listened to me. I don't believe that anybody else really listened to me. But this person listened and said, "Oh, thank you very much." And then nothing more was said. But it's interesting, in an important meeting with more than 20 people, anthropologists, biologists, chemists, very distinguished people, when somebody asked for the difference between organization and structure, nobody had an answer. And when I proposed this distinction, the person that asked the question, who was interested, of course, listened to it. But the rest of the people did not. So, this is a distinction which we do in daily life, in practice, but about which we do not reflect, and presumably, you may be right. We don't reflect because we are usually thinking about identity in a transcendental manner. But it's a very useful distinction, yes?
Would it be true to say that for any particular organisation there's an infinite variety of structures which could be elicited from it depending on its equally unique context or environment?
Yes.
The pattern of response will depend uniquely on the context.
Yes.
In that sense, it's like a concept.
Hmm?
Like in language, a concept can be realised in a
exactly
number
the same.
of concrete ways.
Yes. The organization of the system can be realized through many different structures. And we can say infinite. Let's say an indeterminate number of structural possibilities or dynamics. Yes? And the system, for example, living systems are systems under continuous structural change. Dynamic systems are systems under continuous structural change. And they conserve their identity as long as those structural changes take place with conservation of organization. And those variations are open to be infinite, as you suggest. And they will take place either through the internal dynamics or through the triggering of changes in the interactions of the system in the middle. So those two factors, I'm going to talk about them in a while, participate in the structural dynamics. But structures can change openly, and the system remains the same in terms of class identity as long as the organization is concerned. Moment, yes?
Can you have a new organization with exactly the same structures?
No, I would say no. I would say that you may have the same elements and have a new organization. But if you have a new organization, that means that there are a different set of relations that are being conserved. And that requires that the structure satisfy those relations. But when you have an intersection of systems, in which you have several different organizations being realized, what you have is that the participant components in each one of them are not necessarily all identical, or the relations that realize are not the same, so the structures will not be the same. But if there is an organizational change, there is a change of identity.
What about a small town in the German Democratic Republic? Would they have this change structure or strange change to organisation?
Please again, what?
A small town.
A small town
in the German Democratic Republic, formerly East Germany. The structure hasn't changed in any way, but the organisation clearly has. Of
that part of the country.
Well, they've now been absorbed into a larger organisation. Yes. I'm just giving an example.
Yes. Yeah. For example, there you have two entities which had a different organization, and then they fuse, but in the process of fusion, one is conserved and the other disappears. It is conserved that of the Federal Republic, and the other disappears.
But the small town hasn't changed very much.
Well, the small town, in terms of its own identity as a small town, may not change, but its relations may change. It depends on how this small town is defined as that small town.
I was going to follow the same point. I thought what you were saying before about boy and baby was that you have the same structure, two different organisations, because organisation is partly a matter of definition.
Well, the organization is not partly a matter of definition. I do not fully understand what could be meant by that statement. I'm not saying that it is not meaningful, but I want to say that certainly the organization is always implied. If you say this is a child or this is a baby, you imply different organization. Now, it is definition, yes, but when one says it's partly a matter of definition, one is saying it is arbitrary. Could be one way or the other. And what I'm saying is it's not arbitrary in the sense that could be one way or the other and be the same thing. If you say a child, something happens. If you say a baby, something entirely different appears. It's brought forward, what to say. So the definition, if you wish, constitutes different entities. So it's not just that the same thing is defined in different manner. There is no the same thing, in that case, to be talked about in different manners.
So what I'm really saying is the label can change, but the organisation doesn't.
Yeah, the structure may change, yes, and the organisation be conserved. In the case of the child, the baby grows into a child. As a human being is conserved, the organization. But that which defines the identity of this particular kind of human being as a particular kind, in one case is that which you distinguish as babyhood, and the other is that which you distinguish as childhood. And this is why you expect, of course, also different behavior. Because this is what the mother says, you are a child now, you are not a baby. Certain actions which were legitimate in a baby are not now legitimate in a child, in the context in which you are a child.
somehow have the sense, Humberto, that the words organisation and structure are not dynamic enough to carry your theory. It's almost like I want a word that means ongoing discovery of organisation and ongoing formation of structure. It's like the words themselves somehow don't
You are
carry
right
the dynamic
because
of what you're saying.
you are right because these words have a history of their own. So in fact, I'm twisting them. I'm twisting because if you look at literature, they are not used with this distinction. I made this distinction for the first time in 1972. Now I have an argument. I have a, if you wish, a reason to choose one or the other in the main idea. I said, I shall call organization, since the organization comes from the Greek organon, that means instrument, to those relations that are instrumental in defining the identity of the system. And structure, since structure comes from the Latin, which means to construct, to build, I shall use this to refer to how it is built. So I'm demanding of these words or imposing on their use a dynamism that originally they don't have. You are right on that. Shall we? Last question, and we.
I was just going to say that I think there's some confusion. I think that I gathered from the question about the German town, for instance, that people thinking in terms of structure as being a physical thing and organisation as being an administrative sort of process.
Yeah, this is part of the historical use of this word.
No problem.
But this notion, as I'm proposing to you, you can use in any domain of distinction. In any domain of distinction. But you must accept this, of course, in these terms. And forget a little bit the history.
Would you say structure again, please?
I say the structure is the components and the relations between them that realize a particular entity, a particular composite entity, as a particular composite entity of a particular kind. And the kind is defined by the organization that is realized through the structure.
Can I make a suggestion that I find helpful? When I look at structure, it confuses me, so I've got in brackets underneath it realisation.
Good, that's a good idea.
I'm using that word a lot, but it seems to me it is a realisation
particular
of
organisation.
a particular specific realisation of a general organisation.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so we break for about 15 minutes. Let me. I would like to pursue. Is it working? I would like to pursue some consequences of this, and if in the process you have some questions, please ask. If this is a system, whichever, in whatever domain, in this particular case I'm speaking about a living system, but what I shall say is valid to any system in any domain. As it is distinguished as a totality, is distinguished in relation to a medium in which it interacts. Now, as a composite entity, is an entity whose characteristics result from its manner of composition. And as we were saying before having coffee break, or as we might have implied, if the manner of composition changes, the particular characteristics of that system change. Maybe that the organization changes and hence the system disintegrates, or maybe that the organization is conserved, so the particular characteristic as a particularity, a particular entity, may change. But they do not change in a haphazard manner. There is an expression which I shall use, which is structural determinism. we, in our experience, handle our world in terms of regularities of experience. And these regularities of experience we handle in treating systems as if their characteristics resulted from their makeup. And this is the only thing that we handle certainly as scientists. In science, we handle only systems in which what happens with them or to them is always determined in how they are made. And this is what is meant by structural determinism. Let me make very clear what I say with some examples. Let us suppose that you have a particular machinery, a tape recorder. You want to record something and you press the button and doesn't work. You examine it, see whether it is plugged or not, everything it seems to be okay. It's working with batteries if you wish, the batteries are new, you press the button and it doesn't work. What do? Would you go to the physician, doctor, please examine my finger that whenever I press the button the tape recorder doesn't work? No, we don't do that. But we take our little machine to a person that knows the structure and can modify the structure or examine the structure, and we tell him or her, please examine the structure of my tape recorder and see what has changed or modified in such a way that when I press the button, I release the mechanism of recording. So we deal with this little machine as a system in which what happens to it and with it is determined in its makeup, in the manner it is composed as a composite entity. We do the same thing with living beings. If you have an ailment, a pain, a discomfort, you go to the doctor and say, doctor, please examine my structure and modify it in some way such that discomfort disappears. That is, in our life, we deal with systems which we treat as structure determined. And whenever we find a situation which does not seem to comply with structural determinism, either we suspend judgment and say, oh my goodness, there is something which I do not know here, I have to study more the structure of the system, or we claim miracle. A miracle is a break in structural determinism. In scientific explanations, we handle structural determined systems only. In fact, in living, we handle structure determined systems only. Notice that structural determinism is not the same as predetermination. It does not mean that the system is predetermined in the sense that its initial structure specifies what will happen later, because for any happening, a history must take place. So, a system can be structure determined, and yet you cannot say from its initial structure what will happen later, because for any happening later, and later means time, and time means phenomena, interactions, processes, interactions must take place. if you were to take this system and freeze it and put it in a freezer so that nothing happens to it, and then you take it afterwards, you take it 10 years afterward, this system out, you say, oh, time has not passed through it. Yeah, of course. Time has not passed because time is phenomena, processes, interactions. So when I speak about structural determinism, I'm referring to experience. I'm not referring to a transcendental feature of the universe. I'm referring to the regularities of experience.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm referring to the regularities of experience. At the same time, this means that there may be many different domains of structural determinism. Because there are many different entities in many different domains, with many different kinds of components and hence many different kinds of structures, hence many different regularities of composition and hence of structural determinism. Now this also means that at any moment the structure of a system determines what changes it can undergo with conservation of organization, or what changes it can undergo with loss of organization. It's the structure of that machine, which is the tape recorder, what determines what are the changes that it may undergo such that it goes on being a tape recorder, or what changes may undergo such that it stops being a tape recorder, or with a living system. It is our structure what determines what structural changes we may have and still be alive, and what structural changes may happen to us or we may have and not be alive anymore. But there is something else. The structure of a structure-determined system determines what it admits as an interaction. It is the structure of the photoreceptors of the retina what determines what it admits as an interaction with the radiations, optical radiations, with the electromagnetic radiations, what wavelengths it absorbs, for example. It is molecular structure of the photoreceptor that determines what wavelengths it absorbs. Those which it doesn't absorb is transparent too, and determine which it can absorb and conserve the structure of the photoreceptor, or which it can absorb and be destroyed as a photoreceptor, with loss of organization as a photoreceptor. So it is the structure of the system that determines what it admits as an interaction. It is the structure of the tape recorder which determines what it admits as an interaction which triggers a change of state, which consists in that begins to work, or the destructive interaction so that it stops being a tape recorder. And this which I'm saying is valid for any system in any domain. Now, whenever there is a system in the particular domain in which it exists as such, this is the kind of phenomena that will happen in its history of interaction. That system will participate in recurrent interactions in the medium and will conserve its identity as long as its interactions trigger structural changes with conservation of organization. And this is what we call perturbation. A perturbation is an interaction that triggers a structural change with conservation of organization. So if I ask the question, how long will a living system live? One part of the answer is it will live as long as its interactions are only perturbations. That is, interactions that trigger structural changes with conservation of organization. But at the same time, notice that if it is the structure of the system that determines what structural changes it can undergo, then the interactions cannot be triggered, cannot specify. Nothing external to a structure-determined system can specify what happens in it in an interaction. It can only trigger a structural change determined in it. And this is valid for us too. I do not determine what you hear what you hear determined in yourself. I am a contingency in your life, a circumstance of interaction, which is different from another one. I constitute a different instance of triggering some structural changes in you, different from other persons with whom you may be talking. But what structural changes you undergo, and hence what you hear, depends on you, not on me. I am happily not responsible for what you hear when I speak. But I am happily responsible of being impeccable in what I say.
Is there any way of coping with the concept of transition or disorganization within the relationship of the system and the structure? It seems to me that it's like the perturbation must cause some level of disorganization or transition state to another level or state of organization. How does you?
No, what I'm saying is that if it is a perturbation, you only trigger structural changes with conservation of organization. There is no transition of organization.
It's always conserved.
Always conserved. But there are some interactions which may not be perturbations, which trigger a change of organization, and those result in disintegration. And the system becomes something else, which I indicate here by death of the system, but maybe a different system appears. These toys, how are they called, these toys? The transformers?
Transformers.
Now these are interesting toys. I don't like them because they all have to do with wars and things of this kind. But these are interesting toys because you have something with a certain structure, you enter interaction, you have something with a different identity. The structure changes and the organization changes as well. It's not the same thing. When, for example, I always look at the television where I go, because this tells me a little bit about the country. And I have discovered something that I'm sure you know, that McDonald's has a toy which is a sort of hamburger which transforms into something else. It's interesting, and I mention this because the change is very, very great. You have here something that has the shape of a sandwich of some kind, and then you interact with it in some way and becomes a person, becomes a robot, or becomes something else which is completely different. And there you have a structural change with change of organization.
Same components.
Yeah, but the relations are different, so the structure is different.
Yes. Yes.
Now you can say in both cases it's a toy. With respect to toyness, it's a structural change only. But with respect to what kind of toy, it's a change of organization. Yeah, thank you. But notice something which is very interesting here. If this is a dynamic system, this history will last while the internal structural dynamics takes place with conservation of organization. But it's in a domain of interactions, which trigger structural changes. And this history will last as long as the interactions are only perturbations. That is, interactions that trigger structural changes with conservation of organization. So here you have clearly visible that every system exists as long as two relations are conserved. The relations that define its organization and the relations of correspondence, of congruence with the medium. Adaptation, I would say, which consists in being in a medium which only triggers changes of state. So I can say for every system that it will last as long as it conserves organization and adaptation. I shall dwell a little bit more on this because this is a very fundamental notion. Years ago, many years ago, not so many, but about 10 years ago, I was giving a seminar in the Department of Physics in the Faculty of Science. They had invited me there, and one of the physicists said, the problem with biology is that it doesn't have laws of conservation as physics. And I said, what do you mean? We have two. The law of conservation of organization and of adaptation. A system exists as long as its organization and its adaptation are conserved. In the process, its structure can change. But changes in a manner contingent to the conservation of organization and adaptation. And this is valid for any system in any domain. And not only that, there is a word in daily life for that. And the word is drift. This is a very beautiful word, because there's exactly that. Suppose that you are in this middle of the sea and send a message, help, help. I am drifting. And the coastal guard people don't believe you. So they ask you certain questions. What question will they ask you if they don't believe you? They will ask you, well, but you must have an engine in your boat. No, the engine broke down yesterday evening. But you must have a sail in your boat. No, the sail is destroyed completely by the wind. But you have a rudder. No, the rudder of the boat broke down too. You have oars. No, they were carried away by the waves. Aha, you're drifting then. Exactly, but as soon as being in the boat, you have nothing through which you could claim that you can steer your boat, you are drifting. Very interesting. How long will you be drifting in your boat?
Till the boat sinks.
That's one condition of ending, until you sink. Now, sinking means that you do not float anymore. That is, that you are not in a relation of congruence with the medium that is deceived. You lose adaptation. What other condition may stop your drifting? When you come to the ground, and then of course you stop being in the boat, but let us not look at that for the moment.
Rescue. Rescue.
No, but yet before considering rescue. When your boat breaks down, suppose that the boat breaks down for the wind or for the waves, then you are not drifting anymore in the boat. So you are drifting in a boat as long as floating is concerned and the shaped boat is concerned. Now, that drift of course can come to an end when the condition changes completely, which is when you come to ground or you come to another boat that carries you away. But you are drifting as long as the organization boat is concerned and the relation congruence with the sea is concerned. This is what the word drift means. Drift means displacement in a medium under conditions of conservation of organization and congruence with that medium. And this is what happens to any system in its individual history as a system. This is what happens to every living system as a living entity. Life is a continuous structural drift with conservation of organization and adaptation.
And just to be absolutely clear about that, and that can just as easily refer to that which we refer to as a business, as an organisation.
As a business? Well, yeah, would apply exactly the same. So I was going to say, ladies and gentlemen, you and I, we have all been drifting all our lives. What happens is that we give a certain value to drift, and we say, oh, don't be drifting, you have to control your life. As if one could control it. So, but it's interesting that there is this word, because this word recognizes precisely this. So the story of a system is a story of structural changes and the conditions of conservation, of organization and congruence with the medium that last until these conditions are lost.
Why do you need to invent another word here? I don't understand why you want to have another word. You could have just said that, you didn't need drift. Why did you include drift?
Because this is a word that we use in English. I don't need another word. And I also use this word because it means that there is a daily life understanding of this, or at least a daily life recognition of the phenomenon, if not full understanding of it. But notice that drifting is not a chaotic phenomenon. It's a strictly structure determined phenomenon if you consider the system and its circumstances. That drift is a strictly deterministic phenomenon is picked up by writers, particularly by detective story writers. In the detective story, the criminals throw the body of the dead person in a particular part of the bay. And there are the policemen all examining the place. The divers go down and look for the body and do not find it, but the detective smiles. And he says to his assistant or her assistant, we must go to such and such a place because the current will have taken the body there in the 24 hours that have passed since it was dropped here. And they go there, they find the body. That means that it was drifting in a deterministic manner because if you took into consideration properly the circumstances, you could predict what it was going to be.
How you define mind?
Mind? Or I shall speak about later, about mind. Tomorrow.
So, what's the point of making the distinction of drift?
There is something that you find trivial in it, isn't it?
Because it interests me to try and think about what is non-drift.
Nothing. This is valid for any system. But you are right, there is something that will come out from this, and is the following. Look at this drawing. You may have noticed that there is a congruence between the shape of this entity here and its circumstances, and there is a congruence between this entity here and its circumstances. In a drift, system and circumstances change together congruently. And this is the interesting thing. System and circumstances change together congruently. And when congruence is lost, either they separate or the system that is under your attention disintegrates. This means that you are here not as an accident. You are here as the process of drifting in your life, such that these circumstances in which you and I are here is the result of our drifting in life in congruent changes with our circumstances. I mean, look, I have not become a spiritual or metaphysical or whatever it is. I'm speaking about conditions of constitution of phenomena of structure-determined systems. The whole biosphere is the present of the co-drifting of many different systems. This is why we are so integrated with each other in the kind of congruence that we find that becomes apparent when we destroy it. And we complain about that as ecological disturbances. System and circumstance change together.
If you inject energy into that system, as in that boat, you have an engine or something like that, is it still drifting or
Yes.
is it changing it?
It's still drifting. It's still drifting because if you put an engine, you modify the structure and the dynamics of the thing, but it's still drifting. Now, as you modify the structure, the conditions of interaction are different. So the process, what is taking place in this history of interaction is different, but it's still a drift.
Yeah, so your definition of drifting is not the definition that is in common English, is it?
No, it is. What happened is that we do not understand properly. Yes, it's not. You are right when you say it's not as it's usually understood, because usually it's understood under the belief that one can control the course of the boat. But I shall show you that even with a rudder and with an engine, you do not control the course of the boat. Suppose that you want to be a sailor, a captain of a boat. You have to go to school. What do you study in the school to be skipper or a captain of a boat?
Navigation.
And what do you study when you study navigation?
Stars.
You study stars. You study the structures of the boat. You study the characteristics of the engine. You study the characteristics of the sea. You study the characteristics of the winds, of the waves, and so on and so forth. So what do you do when you are steering a boat? You modify the structure of the boat in such a way that the drift follows certain course and not another. but is still drifting. Now, since we do not fully look at the situation, we say we control the course of the body. And what we do is to modify the structures or the circumstances so that the drift goes in one way or in another. But the phenomenon is drifting. What do you do when you put a child in school? Modify the circumstances in which the drifting life of the child takes place so that it transforms together with the medium which is the school. You want to study something, let's say you want to study medicine, you go to the medical school, you enter through a door, and then you drift inside, conserving your organization as a student, and eventually you come out through a different door with a different structure in different circumstances, which is apparent because you are treated differently. They call you doctor at the end. You disintegrate as a student and appear as a doctor, or you have conserved your identity as a person and your structure has changed, and that structural change is recognized when they call you a doctor.
Would you address the issue of entropy in a system?
You see, there is no problem, because if this is a living system, and this is a molecular system, by the very fact that it's a molecular system, all thermodynamics must be satisfied. So you don't have to talk about it. You don't have an autopoietic system as a molecular system unless thermodynamics is satisfied.
What about larger systems?
For the larger system as well, yeah. There are questions which are very misleading because are misplaced. And this has happened in biology. For example, this tremendous problem about thermodynamics in biological systems, whether biological systems violate thermodynamics because they generate order and so on and so forth, is completely nonsensical. If there are molecular systems, they cannot violate thermodynamics. One can ask, what is the structure? What is the structural dynamics? And one can look into that. But to ask the question, do biological systems violate thermodynamics, is misleading unless one wants an answer which says no, and which says living systems are not molecular systems. Living systems are a special kind of system. Some other things participate in their constitution. But if they are molecular systems, thermodynamics must be satisfied. And they will disintegrate in the moment in which some things will not happen properly in the molecular phenomena. And the structure changes in such a way that disintegrates.
Is the question about choice or lack of choice in drifting another similar sort of question?
Yes, it is a difference, because choice belongs to what you do as an observer. Here the system slides without choice. There is no alternative. You see, alternatives arise in the observation under which you see different possibilities for a system. But this system is not under different possibilities, it's only sliding in the only possibility, in the only conditions under which it conserves organization and adaptation. The same happens with the boat. The drifting boat follows the only path it can follow. This is why the detective says, aha! The detective smiles, see, we go somewhere, we're going to find the body. Or if you have called the coastal guards and said, please help me, I'm drifting. Once the coastal guard is happy that you are drifting, makes you the following question: where are you? And of course you say, I do not know. Yeah, I do not know. Then the coastal guard says, aha, you don't know. But do you know where you were? in some moment before you began drifting. Oh yes, when I began drifting, when this storm took place and broke my sail and broke this and that, according to my latest assessment, I was in such coordinates. So many degrees north and so many latitude and longitude, I was there. So, Titus says, the coastal guard, I shall be in touch with you in a while. So goes to examine the map, he was there, and then he examined the meteorological information he had about the storm, the directions of the wind, the strength, how long it lasted, which winds are prevailing now, and said, so this fellow began drifting 11 hours ago, and the storm lasted about 6 hours after he began drifting, and the winds were in this direction, must be around here, and the currents in this part of the sea are such, so in 5 hours we shall meet you, we know where, we shall meet you. And so the boat is going this way, here is the coastal guard, the boat is going this way, and so they come here to meet you here. Because they know that this boat is following the only path we can follow. And we do. Yeah. So we live the only life we can live. Whenever we say, oh, I could have been an engineer, nonsense. I can now become an engineer, yes. If I go into the medical school and to the engineering school and began drifting as an engineering student. But system and circumstance change together. Could be this situation. Two living systems, and the same will apply. Whenever you have two living systems interacting recurrently, each one becomes part of the medium of drifting of the other, and they change currently. Just like that, without any effort. You don't have to try. You must remain in recurrent interactions only. And this, of course, we know very well in daily life. Mothers and parents tell to the children, I don't like your friend. If you go on with this person, you will become like this person. There is the saying, tell me with whom you go and I'll tell you who you are. That is recognizing precisely this. We should not devaluate daily life. After all our distinctions pertain to daily life. Technical life are bubbles of daily life. Chemistry is a bubble around the kitchen, around cooking. Biology is a bubble around taking care of the animals in the house. Physics is a bubble around repairing the roof of the house. I'm not devaluating chemistry, biology or physics, I'm just calling attention that everything happens in its fundamentals in daily life and becomes daily life for the person that devotes himself or herself to that. So the distinctions that we make in daily life are not trivial. Tell me with whom you go, and I shall tell you who you are, has to do with this. Or the concern of the parents about the friends of their children, or the places they go. Why do you prefer this school and not that one? Precisely because the drifting will be in conservation of a particular relation with a medium that has certain particular dynamics of change, and both will change congruently. And of course the time constants are different. If the time constant of this is smaller for change than this one, this will slide in it, so to speak, conserving organization and adaptation. When one does surfing, for example, in the sea, suppose that you are doing surfing, what do you conserve? You conserve a certain relation of position with respect to the wave. And you go on surfing as long as those relations of congruence with the wave and the positional and the dynamics of the body, which constitutes your standing on the board, are conserved. And you slide, zoom, through it, following the only path that you can follow, concerning those relations until you sink. Yet this cannot be predicted beforehand. Unless you can make the whole situation a structural determined system and you make a computation of the structural changes of that whole system. But if you know only this, and only this here, and you cannot treat the whole situation as a system, you cannot make a prediction. Now the detective that makes a prediction manages to make the whole situation as a system. He knows the winds, he knows the currents, he knows the shape of the bay, blah blah blah, he knows the whole thing, then of course can compute the course of the drifting. But if you do not know that, you know only this, and this particular circumstance, this particular moment, you have no possibility of predicting what is going to happen. But this is a deterministic process. A course that is being constructed moment after moment in the interaction of the system with its circumstance. Now, what changes here in this history is structure. Ontogeny is a word used in biology, ontogeny, to refer to the individual history of a living system. Ontogeny is a history of structural change. History of structural change with conservation of organization and adaptation. Now, it is through the understanding of this that we can eventually answer the question about language and observing. Because the realization that we are structurally determined systems, such that nothing external to us can determine what happens in us, tells us from the start that what happens in language is something different than what one usually thinks, or what happens in cognition is something different from what one usually thinks when one thinks that is obtaining information from the environment or pointing to something that is independent from us. But it is through these congruent changes in recurrent interactions from where we shall find out that that which happens in language can take place as a manner of living in congruent recurrent interaction. Of that we shall speak tomorrow. So this is a very, very important understanding, which, curiously enough, although there is this word drift, is not usually seen. Ecology began in modern times almost as a surprise. Systems are interdependent. Now, 5,000 years ago, perhaps 6,000 years ago, the interdependency of systems was something natural for the people. People lived in an interconnected systemic situation. Then our analytical thinking led us to separate everything into independent entities. And suddenly ecology appeared, showing that we are not independent. But at the same time, this analytical thinking allows us to handle entities in the manner I have done it, and recover this understanding of congruence and interdependency. Because I'm not throwing over the board analytical thinking. I am using it. I'm using it to expand our understanding and recover some views with a different manner of comprehension. To recover the connectedness of entities through the analytical understanding is different from just living in a world of interconnected entities that one accepts a priori. But here we have the mechanism of interconnectedness. So I invite you to dream with these things tonight so that we can meet joyfully tomorrow.